the history of my African ancestors in this country in the colonial period could not be summarized with one word: slavery, which is what I'd thought up till then. I learned that there were many, many African Americans who were part of the heritage that we are all now proud to share, Crispus Attucks being one of them. And I fondly remember Mr. Rohn, a conservative, middle-aged white man in Southern California, Santa Ana, where I was born, my favorite my favorite teacher of all time, because he was a wonderful storyteller. And I remember when he taught us about Crispus Attucks, I was the only person of African descent, at least visible African descent, in the classroom. And he gave me a wink and he let me know, hey, you're a part of this story as well. And it's beyond slavery. And I remember learning, wow, Crispus Attucks, that's a name I can connect myself to. From there, I just learned more about the story. And I learned this in my later years that Crispus Attucks, while he is a patriot, and known as the first person to die, the first American colonial resident or colonist to die in the American Revolution,
Right.
He was also known as a threat. So John Adams, who was an accomplished lawyer at the time, defended the 8 British soldiers who shot into the crowd and killed 5 Americans, 5 American colonists, one of them being Crispus Attucks. And John Adams' defense of those soldiers, it hinged upon the fear that was struck in their hearts at seeing what he called a muscle-bound mulatto that would strike fear in the heart of any person. So he leveraged blackness in a way that was, for him, politically expedient. And I thought, wow, this is not new. Then you look at 2020 and you look at, of course, we're all disgusted and concerned and upset about what happened to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And there are just different cases, and there's nuance there. There are a lot of complications. But when you think about the fact that we as Americans are about sick of seeing Black people and Black bodies brutalized in ways that are just not acceptable. And so I just kind of connected the two. A lot has changed. We're better than we've ever been, but there are still some traces, some things that are similar, that are strangely all too familiar, as I like to say, that I like to talk about, by calling people in, not calling them out, and having real discussions. And I do that by sharing a story. I think stories are the connective tissue that help communities that are diverse to move toward inclusion.
What I am hoping that the Athens Chautauqua Society and the community at large is wanting to look at not just one, but 2 academies that might have some real synergy with each other. And obviously, you all are steeped in history and performance, but the idea is we would have a public square academy, civic engagement, civil discourse, where we involve any of a number of partners, who are doing that, who have convictions in that same area, and then the Young Chautauquan Youth Performance Academy. This incredible place in history right now, as you said earlier, Sonny, it's better and it's worse too right now. But looking at what we can institutionally put in place, creating programs and curriculums, and meeting with schools, particularly the last bastion of democracy. Those are not my words. That's a loose quote. In the area of suggesting that students do the youthful version of what you all do naturally, learning not only research, but writing, performing, and becoming amateur experts on a subject, but really making history come alive.
It's funny, I believe as an artist, and Bruce, you can probably relate to this as well, poetry, performance, they flow through us, even in our study of history, because people like Winston Churchill, for example, were so artful in their oratory, in their thought. It's a form of poetry, right? Even in his diplomacy and his statesmanship. And I found the same thing as I performed the work of people like James Baldwin or W.E.B. Du Bois. And what I found is, I think about Billie Holiday's song, All of Me. Why not take all of me, right? I don't know that she wrote it, but she made that song famous, right? And I think that we as Americans, we have to come to a place, especially as we're training up young performers and thinkers and civic engagers, that we're not representing a perfect humanity or a perfect country. We're representing a beautiful humanity and a beautiful, amazing country laid out in the Declaration of Independence. And we oftentimes don't quite meet the mark, but the fact that we're aspiring toward it makes us Americans. And the fact that we do believe in liberty and justice for all, I think makes us better humans. And so I think that performance and connecting civic engagement with performance and working with youth allows us to help them to tap into their humanity and to learn to love themselves for who they are and what they are, and learn to love their country and their country people for who they are and what they are. And then and only then, I think, can we come to a place where we can come to the public sphere and be quote unquote civil. I am fond of talking about 1619 because it's a symbolic year, the first year that 20 some odd Africans were brought to the American colonies, right? A year before Plymouth Rock, before the Pilgrims land of Plymouth Rock. I'm also very fond of talking about 1776. Thursday, July 4th. It was a great day. And our forefathers, yes, our forefathers, said some great things. And I think that they're both worthy of study, of celebration, of nuance, of analysis, of lamentation. When we allow people to just be ourselves, all of us, in all of our good or bad or positive or negative, our hurts, our joys, etc., we allow our humanity to breathe. And when we allow our humanity to breathe, the poesia, the creation in us comes out. And then we start to imagine what if. And we can look forward, we can look backward, we can look forward, we can start to imagine and play and tell stories. Creative power is addictive, but also it's so generative and it's full of hope. And we're able to share hope through that. So that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm hopeful about the projects that we're all talking about now, and why I think we just need to continue to look backward, perform the now, and aspire and dream as we go forward, all on stages and spaces that we can create into performative spaces where we can wonder what if and play as if together.
I've been concerned recently. There seems to be so much history being written and so many new things being discovered. And unfortunately, it's led to a fear. People are afraid when they find out that the founding fathers had these flaws, or that the country wasn't always a perfect place and it didn't look like what I grew up seeing, which was, nothing but good things, and even the Indians just seemed very happy that their land was being walked all over. When you respond to that with fear, I think it makes people not want to read it. And I don't think you should ever be afraid of the truth or be afraid of what you find. And I think the thing that got me into the 20th century history, the age of dictators and tyrants, is I wonder sometimes if we're any farther along than we were back in the days before World War II. I wonder if we ever learn anything, if we ever turn back and say, is there anything we can learn from this? Years ago, I read a very interesting observation. Someone said that he thought that the world is still in shock from the Second World War, that so much of what we do is reactive, because we can't believe, we look back and we see what we did at Dachau and Auschwitz and Hiroshima, and we think, did we really do that? And how can we go on? And I think, as you said, when you face it, and you don't face it like it's medicine to take, you face it like it's truth to discover and yours to learn from, then even something as awful as the Second World War or the slave trade, that we can get something out of it. The more I read about Stalin and the more I read about Churchill and FDR, the more I wondered, how much of the way we are today was caused by these three men and by what happened, and how much are we still trying to undo, and how much are we still trying to recover from. That, and the fact that all of my aunts and uncles and my father and mother were all of the generation of the Second World War. And I grew up hearing them talk about the war and Hitler and Churchill and all that as though they were people that they knew. And every time I get up on stage and perform, I feel the presence of both my parents, who are gone now, and all of my aunts and uncles, most of whom are gone now. So that's where it comes for me.
My soul was dancing and jumping as you said these things. I thought about the fact that every time I get on stage, a lot of times my work there's some lamentation and there is a tearjerker. And I really do feel like I'm bringing my ancestors and my elders on the stage. I mean, I play my grandmothers and I play my mother and my father, but they're really there with me. And I love the way you just put that. Even through public figures, these public figures have become a part of our heritage. We in some ways we own them, right? Or they're a part of us. And so I love the fact that we can generously open our hearts and minds and bring those people and all of their imperfections into our imperfect bodies. And we can share with the audience my story, which is a part of your story, which becomes our story. and it becomes so very connective. Your parents, aunts, uncles come from a generation that I'm not familiar with, right? You and I are about a generation apart. And I love the fact that through performance, we can find these connections. I was reading a book recently by Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands, and it talks about generational traumas and how we all of us as humans have been dealing with these traumas. And you think about the Holocaust, you think about chattel slavery, think about just, the Middle Ages, how insanely violent those times were for people of all backgrounds, and how if we don't deal with that trauma and process that trauma, we're doomed to repeat it and or just suffer from it for the rest of our lives. And so this whole notion of making it right, we may not be able to go back and make it right, but we can make do. We can move through it, perform with it, dance with it, talk to it, confront it, as you said. And I think in that there's generative power, there's healing power.
The musical Hamilton, I think, did so much for people being able to see the framers, the founding fathers, in just a completely different way of a way of looking at them as being flawed people, but at the same time being able to see them as humans and not marble statues. As strange as the idea of Alexander Hamilton dancing around and doing hip hop, my daughter has become, she's 10, she started to become an American history buff because of that musical.
Who would have thought that you would have heard Thomas Jefferson having in a rap battle and actually learn things from it, right? Yes. I totally agree with you.
Walt Disney was smart to, I hate that we had the global historic pandemic, but if it got the Hamilton into everybody's living room, it might have been worth it.
It did. And I wrote 3 palaces at Yalta during the lockdown.
My pastor at church has called this the plandemic in some ways. Not to say that God is raining down fury upon us, but if you are open, you can find avenues and that silver lining. And I ended up writing my latest piece called Haunted, and it's about the musings that came to my mind in the wake of the Mother Emanuel shooting. Dylan Storm Roof, that troubled young man who killed 9 people in that church called Mother Emanuel, or Emanuel
Yes.
African Methodist Episcopal Church there in Charleston, South Carolina, on June 17th, 2015. And how I had to try to find a way to explain to 2 little black boys who were 7 and 4 at the time what hatred is and what racism is. And so this show Haunted talks about how our history, our proclivities, our notions of what whiteness and blackness and race and right and wrong, how those things have they've haunted us over the years. And we respond to them. We react to them. And instead of responding, actually, we often react. We have these knee-jerk and gut reactions that can sometimes be violent and sometimes be problematic. And so Haunted is another one-man show that goes into this notion of what it is to love your country, love yourself, and love others, and acknowledge the fact that it's all troubled. What I'm learning is that as we continue to grapple with these stories and deal with our own traumas that we have not yet confronted, we find joy. We can find some comedy. We can find some hope in this time where I've really been socially distanced and I've been isolated and only dealing with people virtually for the most part. I found time to sit down and muse and consider, well, what do I think about this? And not the talking points, not the politicians or the pundits that I normally listen to, not the news channels, but what do I think? And it's allowed me to metabolize historical trauma, to metabolize my own hopes and dreams and vulnerabilities and my deep concerns about where we are now in terms of the division in this country, the political, in some cases, the racial division, the deep sorrow that I feel about the fact that I love police officers. My grandfather was a police officer. My father was a military police officer. I was in the Air Force. I very much value and honor authority. And I'm also troubled with some of the lack of accountability that I see amongst our peace officers and police officers. And I'm troubled with the fact that the solution's not so easily accessible to us.
I'm afraid we sometimes, at least in the past few years, have been led to believe that we're a lot worse than we really are. Mm-hmm. And that we're not being told to aim higher than what we have been. And that's just, I think that has destroyed civility, an inability to even listen. And I don't know if the pandemic had a good effect or a bad effect on that, but I think overstimulation has caused some of that problem, and maybe some people were encouraged to turn off and tune into a different source of inspiration or whatever. And I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at here, but I think we've been brought down to a lower common denominator than we need to have been brought down to. And I don't know how to raise that. And if the arts have some way of doing that, then let them do it.
We're using this time to dig deeper, to challenge ourselves, and to really cut out the distractions and find the destinations, And I hope more people will do this. But if they don't, that's kind of part of what we're called to do. All those late nights, all those sleepless hours, trying to get the line right, get the moment right, dig deeper in research. We are the ones doing we're what Plato calls those the philosopher kings, right? Not that we're better than anyone, but we are committed to do the work, to dig, so that we can come out of that cave and produce to society the nuance, the possibility, the full, all of me.
Your daughter, what would you have her be learning in the classroom?
I would have her learn a foreign language.
Okay.
Whatever she was inclined to. If she wants it to be Spanish or French, or a less traditional language like Mandarin. I say traditional. I mean, it's spoken by millions and millions of people, but it's not taught that often in schools. A language that would open up a part of the world to her, not only just culturally, but also just communicating with people day to day and reading other people's literature and that kind of thing. That would be one thing. Also, I don't know how you could do it. If I could wave my hand and get rid of something, I'd get rid of fear, because it just seems to be the most divisive force at work right now. And it permeates everything. It's not only fear in the government, in culture, it's fear in schools. It's like if you read something and somebody says, well, that's not true. All right, if it's not true, you don't have to believe it, but you don't have to tell other people they can't believe it. And you don't have to try to make it disappear. I think that's partly what's behind cancel culture. We can't grapple with something, so we just have to dig a hole and bury it in the ground. If we could get rid of this fear we've been developing and cultivating, and that has been encouraged nationwide by all political parties, then I think we would go a long way toward acceptance and toleration, the kind of toleration that's not just, oh yeah, I'll fall for anything, but just, this country is, everybody said it's an experiment. Lincoln said the United States was the last best hope of mankind. I would hate to think that, but if it can be done anywhere, it could be done here. I think that is the people that we are, and that's the people that that's being denied now.
It's so refreshing to hear a fellow artist from a different generation, ostensibly from a different racial background, say so much of what I've been trying to tell people over here as well. I think about one of my favorite quotes from Yoda, the famous philosopher Yoda,
yes.
Fictional philosopher: fear is the path to the dark side. With
Yes.
fear comes hatred, anger. From anger comes hatred, and hatred leads to suffering. Getting our kids, our young people, our students to confront fear and to refuse to retreat. That's the word I was looking for earlier. We retreat to our respective silos, our safe places. We want to be around people who look like, live like, and love like us, and that keeps us predictable and simple, and we don't have to confront the fear. Getting kids to try new things like learning new languages, having conversations with folks who do not speak like, look like, live like, or love like them, just to have a deeper understanding. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to like it, but just to get an idea of the humanity of the other is so very important. So for me, I would say, in whatever you teach people in schools, there are three elements that I want to make sure that we're cognizant of. Number one, I think being politically correct should not be a goal. Politically correct keeps people safe. I don't think safety has ever, especially as Americans, safety has gotten us nowhere. It's courage that gets us someplace. It's pressing into the breach, right? With sometimes reckless abandon to find out what's going to happen. The pioneering spirit, right? So being politically correct should not be the goal. We should not be politically correct, but we should also not be so focused on popular cancellation when we hear things we don't like, and burying them, as Bruce said, that we lose sight of what we can learn from, even people with whom we disagree, or even issues or truths or facts that we don't like. right? So let's not be so politically correct that we're super careful about everything. But let's not be so, what's the word, righteous, self-righteous, that we cancel everyone who disagrees with us. So let's be personally connected. That to me looks like, in my case, as a more conservative Christian American, asking my students what their pronouns are. I have a few people who are transgender in my life, and I love them. I don't fully understand it. I'm still working through spiritually, mentally, cognitive, all those things, but I know they're humans and I love them. And so I ask and I share my pronouns because I think that is important, to be personally connected with the people with whom I am sharing space. We talk about this hateful term, blood and soil, and I want to reframe that. I want to say, let's stand on the same soil together, and let's acknowledge the fact that we have the same forefathers and foremothers, even if they aren't biologically connected to us. We all share this same heritage, from Sacagawea to Harriet Tubman to George Washington. They're all ours. We can own, when I say own, not in the sense of property, but we can own in terms of we can partake in the multivariant, diverse heritage that has been given to us by virtue of the fact that we were born in, I'm going to say it, the greatest nation ever. As a point of hope, both of my boys, Sterling, who is now 13, and Langston, who is 7, they're in Chinese immersion programs in public school here in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They've been learning Mandarin since they were in kindergarten. They're both fluent, and it's pretty cool to see.